My name is Claire Shu, and I'm the manager of implementation support at CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning. And for those of you who aren't familiar with CASEL, CASEL is an organization that's been around for 25 years with the purpose of embedding social emotional learning into the education field. And CASEL does that in a couple different ways. You all have a packet in front of you that I'll be referencing throughout the evening, so you can see a little bit more information just about CASEL generally on that first page there. So CASEL has three main arms: a research arm, practice, and policy. So those are all the different ways that CASEL sort of drives SEL forward. I'm part of the practice team, so that means that I get to partner with school districts to both support their journey with social emotional learning and bringing that into their schools and their district, but also we learn from districts, we learn from their experience, and one of our goals is to pass on that experience to others. So what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight is one of the resources that CASEL has available online. There's a number of different resources, though, that CASEL makes available for free online with the aim of just higher quality implementation of evidence-based social-emotional learning nationwide. Probably the best known of those is the program review guides. Those have been around the longest. It's currently in the process of being renewed right now as well. So that's a good place to go for anyone who's looking for a really high-quality evidence-based social-emotional learning program. That's a good fit for your school. There's so many different ones out there. The program review guides gives you a good snapshot of what is available. Most recently, the SEL assessment guide, so a good place to go if you're thinking about how you want to be measuring social-emotional learning and progress in that. And there are resources that are focused on the needs of states, districts, schools, and at home. So our focus for this evening is the guide to Schoolwide SEL, or the School Guide for short. And that resource, as well as others, has really been shaped by long-term partnerships with school districts. We currently work with 20 different, mostly large urban school districts around the country. And through those partnerships, we both support them, but also learn from their experience and use that to really shape the content of what's in these resources and the processes that outline sort of theory of action of how to bring SEL into a school and make it work. So it's not just, these resources aren't just based on a few small-scale studies, but really on the work of these large districts that have been implementing SEL in all of their schools over a long period of time to really find out what is practical and what's sustainable with social. So the school guide, or the CASEL guide to Schoolwide SEL, is an interactive website. And if you do have your laptop with you tonight, you're welcome to have that open and look. But if you don't have your laptop with you, you don't need it this evening. You can just sort of bookmark this for later. But the school guide is a website that's devoted to the how of implementing social-emotional learning in school, from those very first conversations to the continual process of measuring progress and making continuous improvements over time. So my goals for our evening together, first is to just really give an overview of what's the sort of the zoomed out view. What does school-wide social-emotional learning look like in practice, and also what is CASEL's theory of action for how to get there. I want to set up a lot of time for you to speak with people that you came with, or if you came on your own, to speak with some colleagues that you're meeting tonight about some of those processes that are involved in that process of Schoolwide SEL, and to get some experience with what some of the activities are in the school guide and what it would be like to take that back to your own school community and try out some of those tools. And my hope is that everyone, regardless of where you are in your process of social-emotional learning, whether it's new to you, whether you've been doing this for years already, that everyone can take away something from tonight that they can use right away. So those are my primary aims tonight. I do want to start, though, from not from the most basic level, because I know if you were here at the last event, you heard from Dr. Mark Greenberg about what social-emotional learning is, why it matters in making caring, welcoming schools. So you're probably already familiar with this definition, especially if you came here this evening. And you may already be familiar with the 5 core competencies of social-emotional learning that is promoted by CASEL and what CASEL is often known for. So I actually want to start one step beyond that and focus first on those three blue circles around the circle classrooms, schools, and homes and communities. And the reason those circles are there is because it's to communicate that those competencies aren't just learned at an individual level, they're learned in context, they're learned in a larger ecosystem. For students, that means that the process of social-emotional learning doesn't just happen in a single class or a series of assemblies. It happens in their classrooms, but also in their other school experiences and their experiences outside of school as well. So once we've reached an understanding of what SEL is, the next challenging question is, what does it actually look like in action when it's a school-wide practice? So I'm actually going to turn this question first to you at your tables. If you don't already know each other, now's the time, because tonight's going to be an evening of many discussions. So do get to know, you don't need to talk to your whole table if you're at a big table, but the 2 or 3 people that are closest to you, and just take a moment to look at these 4 different squares and discuss with each other, how does SEL show up in those different settings, or how could it show up in those different settings? To get a sense of where people are in the room, let's take a quick vote on which one of these was the easiest to imagine social-emotional learning happening. Raise your hand if we thought in classrooms was the easiest to imagine. All right, raise your hand if you picked all school practices and policies. You can picture SEL there. How about staff and meetings? See a couple hands there. And family and community relationships? A couple? All right, so definitely seems like by far people are thinking they can see SEL happening in a classroom. Some of these might have been a little bit more interesting to discuss. Raise your hand which one you think was the most interesting to discuss, I'll say. The most interesting. Let's say staff meetings. Family and community relations. All school practices and policies was the most interesting. In classrooms was the most interesting. All right. So I want to take a quick sidebar. If you turn to the next page in that packet, page 2 and 3, just see a short explanation of what CASEL calls the SEL 3 signature practices. It's just a really quick and simple way to integrate social-emotional learning into any setting, whether that's a classroom, whether that's a staff meeting, a presentation, parent event, family event at your school. So what we just did was a welcoming inclusion activity. The purpose of those is just to set the tone, give everyone a chance right away to make a contribution to the meeting and the setting, and to sort of create that sense of group membership with people that they're sitting with and speaking with. Engaging practices, I'll try and use a number of those throughout the evening, and those create space for people to build on ideas and sort of just take some time to process what they're hearing about, to listen to what other people are thinking and build on others' ideas. And then the optimistic closure is something that's quick to put in at the end of the meeting or at the end of a class period where you're giving everyone a moment to reflect on the progress that they made, the learning that they had, and what their personal next steps are, but also to take a moment to recognize their own contribution to the space and to recognize the contributions that the people sitting next to them made to their learning throughout the event. So I'm going to be throwing these in throughout our evening tonight, and if you are interested in this as a practice, it's a great, easy way to get people started thinking about what SEL can look like in different settings. The whole playbook is available on the Schoolwide website. There's a URL at the bottom of page 2 there, and you can also just read a little bit more about the 3 signature practices there. But that's just a sidebar. I want to go back to that question of what does SEL look like when it goes school-wide. So on page 4, you'll see CASEL's answer to that question. Not to detract from your own answers to that question, but this is sort of the landscape view of what a school that's been implementing SEL according to CASEL's model over a period of 3 to 5 years can expect to start to see. I wouldn't think about it like a checklist, though. This is definitely a bunch of different concepts that are interrelated with each other. And it's definitely more of a landscape look, a snapshot of what a school might look like, rather than something that you can check off items one at a time. Rather than read through those specific descriptions of each of these indicators of school-wide SEL on the page, I think it's just a lot more effective to show it to you. So I'm going to pull up a video of a school in Chicago, Illinois. It's Marcus Garvey Elementary. It's a pre-K through 8th grade school. And this is a school that's just been working really closely on their model for social-emotional learning for a period of years in partnership with Castle. It's a school I've been to a lot of times. I used to work for the district in Chicago. So as you watch the video, I'd just like you to have open page 4, page 5, where there's some room to write in your packet, and watch for some of the indicators popping up in the video, see if you can spot any of them happening in practice, and write down anything that's interesting to you, any of those indicators that stick out to you or that you'd like to talk about a little bit more.
First, it started with really having a strong SEL team. Once the team comes together, then they plan their professional development.
We spent this year really motivating the teachers, keeping them empowered, giving them help when they need help. We all did spent the first week or so getting to know our students through classroom building activities. And that created positive relationships. School, to me, has always been about nurturing students rather than just teaching them. You can't teach them anything if you don't know them. SEL is spoken through our student work. It's learning how to self-manage and problem solve and use critical thinking. We literally live SEL here. If someone was visiting, they would see common language.
How we line up, how we enter the building, how we get our lunch, that we say good afternoon, that we say please, that we say thank you. And they understand that from pre-K through 8th grade that these are the expectations.
Today we learned why it's important to check our assumptions, especially when you have your strong emotions. Why is it important to check them?
Sometimes when you're mad and you make a decision, you don't know what you're doing, or you just don't be thinking, you just act.
When we first started out, we started out with Second Step. And Second Step was a program that we felt that they could really implement on the ground floor, getting to really know and understand the social-emotional learning standards with fidelity.
By writing her diary that her mom had bought her. So even today, if you have something that you're going through, what do?
You can still pour out all your emotions in your journal.
How is that an excellent way to manage your emotions?
From there, we started doing lesson integration. We wanted to show that this is something you can do without just having a program, and that it would be actually intertwined into our entire curriculum.
So it just comes natural when we're talking about characters. Today, with Sharon Draper's book, Fire from the Rock, is we were talking about the main character, Sylvia, and how she has to manage her emotions going through this difficult time. So it just seemed natural to me to kind of weave them together. I'm thinking about how the students are going to react to the certain challenges that the characters are facing. And they can see that, okay, well, this is social emotional learning, and it's an everyday kind of thing.
I really enjoy teaching SEL. It's embedded throughout the day. It's not separate for us. I find time for it during reading, during a read aloud, during a math talk, working in cooperative groups.
Today's topic for our Monday mentoring group is using emotions as a guide to decision making.
With the Monday mentoring program, that's really taken us to a different level because it ensures that every student in the building has a relationship with someone other than just their classroom teacher. The students feeling at home or this being a safe environment for them. One of the things that we really pushed is really understanding your emotions and how emotions impact actions, decisions, and consequences. Taking responsibility for self, responsible decision making, and goal setting. These are things that the students have to own themselves.
Something that you're stressing about that you want to let go.
Many times we talk about having our journal where we write stuff down, but sometimes you have to get it out.
Children need to have strategies in place to solve problems and control their emotions. When there's a disagreement, we come up to the classroom and we solve that disagreement, whether it be as a whole class or in the peace center. If we need to talk about it a little more, then we'll spend that time.
We have peer supports, and so they may be referred to the Peace Center or some restorative conversations.
If a student needs individual time by themselves, each classroom, or even the library, the gym, we have what's called a Peace Center. And it's just a little corner of the room that the teacher has set aside where the students can calm down.
We have a lot of partnerships with different agencies, so it may be a referral to Universal Family Connections, which provides our on-site counseling and off-site counseling. When we're meeting their need at the tier 1, tier 2 level, then it really doesn't escalate to the need for the tier 3 services.
Do you have a friend on your left side? Do you have a friend on your right side?
Relationships are very key. And for us, it starts with our relationships as adults with one another. We're modeling those appropriate behaviors for our students and also our interaction with our parents.
Today is the kickoff of Week of the Young Child. So guess what? I have some love notes from your parents.
We had parents write love letters to their children, which we displayed all throughout the school. And I don't think people realize how much what that does for a child.
It says, Jada, keep on doing a great job in school. I am very proud and love you very much. Love. This love note is for Micah. You are so nice and sweet. I love you. Love, Mom.
The first thing to discuss on our agenda is rainbows. In addition to wearing our colors, do something else to like show that pride for Marcus Garden.
We have a lot of students, they've actually grown up in this SEL environment, so they're training younger students to be more involved. So they know what to say, they know what to look for, they know what to show.
I just feel like it's an integral part of what we do.
Kids are more responsible. They actually take charge of their own learning. They become excellent speakers and they can solve their own problems.
You can't really have success on the academic level without meeting their social emotional needs. It's necessary to really have a holistic approach to the needs of our students in order to have a very productive school.
So I'm curious what pieces of those 10 indicators sort of popped out or made you think, or you had additional thoughts about it. So what indicators were prominent, or what kind of stuck out to you about the school, or what were you just thinking about the kind of work that the school might have done to get to where they are? I mean, it's never a process that's finished. Every school is constantly in progress, but any thoughts stick out to anybody that you wanted to share with the room?
It seems pretty obvious that they've been invested in it for a while, if they have other students that are serving perhaps as mentors, and sort of built into the whole culture of the school, it looks like.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear that, he was speaking to how people have been invested in it for a while, since they have these older students who have been growing up in this environment and are now serving as mentors for younger students. So I think that absolutely speaks to how this is not a one-year process. This is something that every year schools make more and more progress and are constantly sort of course correcting as they go and making changes and additions along the way. Anything else anyone wanted to highlight from the video?
Yeah, that it's not a separate process. So you don't have your where you're teaching and then you have your SEL. Like SEL is intertwined into teaching, and that, like you mentioned at the end of the clip, is that unless students have their basic needs met, then the teaching part of it, they don't get that part. So their basic needs have to be met first, and of course, a part of that is building relationships with students, and then the teaching happens, and the teaching and learning happens.
Absolutely. So you see that emphasis on the supportive environment,
right.
And we're teaching social emotional learning while we're teaching literacy, while we're teaching, I'm not sure what other subjects were displayed, but definitely that literacy lesson, and I know they've done a really good job of integrating it just with math mindsets and so forth, but also teaching it explicitly too. It's not just one of those things. Did anyone else want to highlight anything?
Seems like all the adults are on the same page. Nobody opted out.
Yeah, and I didn't get into it too much in the video, but Principal Van Allen did mention the importance of our relationships with each each other. She was speaking about her staff and how I know that staff is one of the lowest turnover schools that I knew in Chicago, that people are really invested in that school and invested in each other. Exactly, so that adult SEL indicator is really prominent at that school as well. So I think our next question then is how do we get to a school where all those different pieces are falling into place? Again, I don't want to communicate that there's an end point because we're always continuously improving, but how do we get to this space where these 10 different indicators are starting to show up in our building? So CASEL identifies 4 different aspects of implementation. And this is based on the work that we've done in partnership with the schools and districts over time. And so it's based on these common themes that we've seen over and over again. It's not a complicated graphic, but this first stage is really, really key. This yellow stage, the organized stage, is where we're building foundational support and planning and really putting into place those key structures, like having an SEL team that can meet regularly to focus on this, not just one person in the building who's in charge of SEL or just the administrators at the school are in charge of SEL. Also having a resource plan in place and some stakeholder support being built up, not just among staff, but students are stakeholders, families are stakeholders, your community organizations that you partner with are stakeholders, making sure that everyone has heard about this and sees their role in it and is interested in moving it forward. The next 2 pieces, 2 and 3, are strengthen adult SEL and promote SEL for students. Often these are happening at the same time. Sometimes a school will choose to target one of those before the other. But those are the implementation stages. So that second piece is really important. It's something that CASEL added to their framework after working with schools and districts and hearing how important this was. So that's really making sure that adults have strong social emotional competencies and are aware of the way that they're modeling those for students all the time. And also that there's a positive work environment for adults that really enables them to be able to do this work in an environment where they're often very overworked and overstressed already. And focus area 3 is about promoting SEL for students. So often people sort of think that they check that box as soon as they get a classroom-based curriculum, but it's really a lot more to it than that. It's making sure that a student's experience throughout their school day is very aligned and coherent, and that they're getting the same messages in different settings throughout the school day and with different adults that they come into contact with. And then focus area 4 is positioned at the end, but it's really the underlying driver of all these other pieces, the improve phase. So really that's where we're asking the questions of what are we measuring to know that we're making progress towards our goals as a school? Are we checking in on those things over time? Are we reflecting on how we're doing and making changes as we go? Because the first choice that a school makes isn't always necessarily the choice that's going to get them where they want to end up. So that's the basic theory of action. We're going to spend more time on each of these individually, but before we dive into the what of the school guide, I want to take a moment to focus a little bit on the question of why, because the why really influences the how in any school building. School communities come to SEL for a lot of different reasons, and the different reasons for coming to SEL is going to result in a very different approach to social emotional learning. So a school community that their main goal in adopting social emotional learning as a school is to increase rule following and reduce problem behaviors is going to probably take a very different approach to SEL than a school whose primary goal is to prepare students to go out and change the world, right? That's going to look very different. And when a school community has a lot of different opinions about why we're doing SEL, there's going to be a lot of disagreement about how we should do it and what practices we should adopt. So taking time to discuss as a school why are we doing this is really an important step. That is not one that should be skipped, and it's always something that can be gone back to as well. So CASEL is one of CASEL's primary reasons for SEL is to contribute to more equitable educational experiences and outcomes for students. And from conversations I've had with some of you, I know that that's a major priority for many of you in the room as well. So I wanted to take a moment to share with you a definition of educational equity and a definition of school-wide SEL. Those are both on page 6 in your packet. So if you could take take a moment to read those definitions and just reflect with the people you're sitting nearest, the 2 to 3 people that you spoke with earlier especially. Reflect a little bit about how those things might be connected and how they might connect to some goals that you have for your school. I want to start this first part of the evening by just being transparent about some of Castle's reasons why, Castle's beliefs about social emotional learning, because I don't share these to detract from your own school community's reasons for bringing social emotional learning to your students and your staff and your families, but just because I think it's important to think about the why first, so we understand why is the school guide written the way that it is, why does the school guide include the tools that it has, and why are they shaped in this way. So just some of Castle's beliefs that sort of tie together these ideas of equity is, first of all, that SEL is something that's relevant for all students. It's not something that's specially created for students who are facing behavior problems or facing a lot of trauma in their lives. This is something that's good for everybody and not just students. It's good for adults as well, school building. And that when it's done in a way that's affirming of diverse cultures and diverse perspectives, that it's something that really benefits people in all different contexts. Also, we see SEL as a strategy for system-wide improvement. It's a school improvement strategy. It's not an intervention. It's something that's a strong lever for school-wide improvement in a lot of different aspects of improvement that schools are looking to make. Also, that it can be a great way to uplift student voice. There's no good way to make progress on making a better school climate for students if we're not listening to what they have to say about the school climate and their relationships in the school. It's something that can really support adults in being more equitable in the way that they do their work every single day. And also, finally, that absolutely SEL needs to be done in a way that engages students and their families and their communities as real partners, not as someone who's just going to be the receivers of information, but someone who's also contributing to that constant process of continuous improvement as well. So the next part of our evening is going to be to go through those different focus areas in a little bit more detail. And the way that I'd like to do this, each of these focus areas has its own section on the website. There's dozens of tools for each one. You can't possibly get through all of that in an evening. So what I'd like to do is share some of the core questions to give you a picture of the kind of actions that make up each focus area. And then I'm going to pick just one tool to spend a little bit of time with. I'm going to give you time to discuss it at your table and do a short activity to experience what it might be like to take something like this and do it in your own school community. And think about, where do you want to start with your school guide? Are you ready for focus area 2? Are you more focused on focus area 4? And you'll get a sense of that throughout this evening. So focus area 1 is that foundational focus area. The core questions here is to think about, do we have a team that's focused on this SEL planning that's not just 1 or 2 people? Does everyone that's part of the school community understand what social emotional learning is and sort of why they're an important piece of it? Have we worked together with everybody to create a shared vision for why we're starting to use social emotional learning at our school? And have we sort of thought through where we are, what we already have in place, what we're doing well, and where we want to go next? Here's just a sampling of some of the tools that you can find in the Focus Area 1 section of that website. And the one that I'd like to take a deeper dive with is steps for developing a shared vision. And this might be something similar to the process you've used at your own school, but I think it's helpful to sort of think through what this would look like when thinking about social emotional learning. And this is a process that was adapted from a process that a school has used. Sprott Community School specifically shared this process with us, and that's the school pictured in that photo there. And the first step is to really mindfully gather stakeholders. So that includes students, that includes staff and families, and the community organizations that might work with a lot of your students outside of school time, whether that's through direct partnership with your school or just say you share a lot of young people with different organizations. All of these can be really key stakeholders, and it's important to think about, in what ways do we have access to these different groups in a way where I'm not just asking the people who always raise their hand and always come to the meetings, but how can I really reach a diverse group of a lot of different perspectives when thinking about why we want to do SEL and what we want it to look like and how we want it to transform our school. So once you have this core group of stakeholders, the next step is to have all of those different individuals identify why. And they may not be familiar with social-emotional learning yet, so that's why none of these questions have those terms in it. But as a first step and as just sort of a thought experiment to do at your tables, I'd like you to take some Post-it notes from the middle of your table and think about your own answer to these questions and write an answer on a different answer on each statement, or a different answer to a question on each statement. And once you've written your own perspective, how you could answer those questions, try and think about some of your stakeholder groups that you don't talk to quite as often, and try and think about how they would answer that question, and write some more answers on statements. Just make a little pile for yourself now. All right, if you have already made your own stacks of sticky notes and thought about the perspectives of some of your stakeholders as well, especially those that you might be in less frequent contact with, I see that you're already speaking at your table, so you might already know what I'm going to ask you next. I'd like you to start sharing your own things and trying to categorize them. So put them in piles that sort of match by theme, whether or not they're answering the same question. Ask them the 3 ideas that have come up with all of those. Nice. All right, we'll share one of the themes that came up at your table in just a sentence or two. As you categorize them, what seems to be coming up. We have the room quite enough to sit about, the mic will be heard really clearly. I had it up.
To develop confident kids who are people for others.
Confident kids who are people for others?
Yeah.
You want to expand on that a little?
We're a Catholic school, and we focus a lot on service, and so you can't help others if you aren't helped yourself. And we talk about educating the whole child, and so the whole child is their emotional being as well as their.
Yeah. So that would be great language to filter down into a vision statement that's shared. I think those are really powerful things. Other tables, were there other sentiments that came across more than once in the Post-its that y'all shared? Yeah.
Well, under Thrive, we had a lot about kids people thrive with relationships and understanding.
Relationships and understanding will lead to thriving. Thanks. Any others?
So our commonality was like a safe environment to be able to grow and learn and experiment and learn about ourselves and others.
Thank you. A sense of belonging. A sense of belonging. At all people on this side of the room so far. Anyone over in the middle?
Well, as people who are talking, what comes to me is that through all of those things that you guys just said, their basic needs are being met. And again, we go back to the basics. If students' basic needs aren't met, we're not going to get the other stuff. It's not going to happen. So, yeah. And the one thing that we discussed in our group is that all of this is really time consuming. And then we also talked about how oftentimes we see, not everyone, but some teachers want a quick fix. They want, to say, well, this is the way it should be, and it should happen this way in 5 minutes, and then it's done. No, it doesn't happen that quick. It's a process. And when you practice something, it's continuous. You have to continue to practice over and over again. And then we also talked about reflection. So if you're reflecting on your practice, then maybe you didn't say that right. Maybe you didn't do that right. How you then go back to the drawing board, start all over again, collaborate, which is so important, and really build from there. So I think, yeah, it's a complex thing. It's not one answer. It's many answers, and you just got to keep working at it. So.
Any others wanted to surface a theme? Even if it's not a theme, one sentence theme. It's complex. So the next step, which we're not going to go through as a group this evening, but there is the full process available in the school on the school guide. Is then to take, probably then take 2 tables and have you communicate with each other, pick out some themes, maybe even draft a vision statement, and then take those different vision statements and just continue to filter them down until there's one shared vision that incorporates the views and perspectives and the key words from the beliefs that a lot of different people express so everyone sees themselves in it. And then to make that shared vision really visible and actionable for the whole school community. So this is the vision statement that the school in the photo ended up with that took a lot of different words and a lot of different things that were really meaningful to their group of stakeholders and put it into one statement. So ideally then this vision is used to drive what the SEL goals even are. And then those SEL goals can be further used to plan action steps from there. A really key tool within the school guide, which we're not going to look at closely right now, but I want you to be aware of it. It's a good foundational tool as well. Goals should also be based on what you're already doing, what you're doing well, you're building on what you've already been working on. So the rubric is a great tool to sort of take stock of where SEL is strong in your school building, where your strengths are, and also what are the areas that you want to work on more closely to set those goals. And if you do that on the online planner that's available on the site, then it opens up a new module where you can start to set goals based on what you found in responses to the rubric and plan action steps from there. So ideally then your goals will drive the work that SEL team does when they meet. And also it will drive the kind of data that you're going to be looking at throughout the year to know if you're getting closer to where you want to be when you set your vision. So how are we driving closer and closer to that vision, and are we making progress, and do we need to course correct partway through the year when we realize we may or may not be driving directly towards those goals that we set for ourselves.
That's a quick question. In
Yeah.
Chicago, where I'm going to do it, is it school by school? Like in Chicago Public Schools, is there some school districts that are doing SEL learning and some that are not? It's not at a district level.
So in Castle's experience, because we work mostly with districts that are coordinating SEL support for all their schools, I think it kind of is both and. So a district often will set aside funds specifically for social emotional learning. They may have staff people who support schools and visit schools and support them in sort of going through this process of using something like the school guide. But I think it's also really key that schools sort of take their own unique approach to it and are able to sort of customize it towards their school community because there's so much diversity across the school district.
One question.
Yes.
And I don't, this might be just in the development stage, but you said about assessing progress. How do you assess progress with SEL? Is that something kind of later? Or?
That's, well, we'll touch on focus area 4 during the presentation a little bit, but just kind of at a basic level. In terms of like the science of how to assess SEL, that's really complicated and that's a developing field. So actually I would direct you to the assessment guide, and I think the URL is on the first page of your packet too, where that gives you a rundown of all different sorts of ways that are available and are validated instruments for actually measuring social emotional learning, and there's a lot of different ins and outs to that. So I think that's a topic for another evening, probably different from other. I want to give you a chance to experience a little bit of focus area 2. This is an area of major interest, something that a lot of school communities have really decided that this is something that they'd like to focus on. So some of the core questions there are about, what kind of professional learning are we offering in an ongoing way to staff to learn more about what SEL is and how they can promote it for their students. But also, do we have space and time to actually just think about our own social emotional growth and where we're headed and what we're good at and what we need to work on? And are we creating that sense of community among staff and that culture of collaboration? And how are we modeling this in the way that we act and the way that we talk when we're communicating with students and with each other and with our students' families? So some of the tools that you'll see in Focus Area 2 are up here now. The one that I want to focus on with you, though, I brought an abridged version of personal SEL self-reflection. So it's just a one-page document that's on page 7, although I think the page number disappeared in your packet. So this is just an opportunity for you to individually go through some different statements, and also if I neglected to share an exact definition of social emotional learning with you either. This will also give you a really clear picture of what social emotional skills are according to Castle's 4-5 competency framework. So take some time to go through this individually and then take a look at the questions that I'm putting up on the screen when you've gone through it to sort of process it on your own. And then we'll take a little bit of time with each other as well. Interrupt the conversation for just a moment. I just want to reiterate that doing an individual reflection, the answers to these questions behind me are really for you. I'm not going to ask you to explain your answers to these questions with people at your table, but what I think might be useful to discuss with others, since you have your colleagues here with you, is if you've done something like this with your team at your school before, how did it go? If you haven't, how do you think it would go? And what would be the purpose of doing an exercise like this with the adults, with the staff at your school? So this is just one exercise out of many that's available in the focus area 2 section of the school guide. I hope that you will, if you're interested in this, you'll take some time to explore a little bit more about other things that are available and posted already. I want to pause though just to see if any questions are coming up from all of you about this exercise, the purpose of this exercise, or thoughts on that, or about adult social emotional learning in general. That's often not where people's minds go first when they think about social emotional learning in a school. So I want to just check in and see if any questions have come up that you'd like me to answer before we move to focus area 3.
One of the things we were talking about is how we as adults are in this frantic pace to get so much done and to go from thing to thing to thing and make your most efficient transitions and pack it all in. And we're laying that anxiety and that franticness upon our classrooms and our kids. And someone at our table made a good point that she had a student say to her, I just want to be able to finish, like one of the things I'm working on, and not feel pushed to the next thing. So when I think about self-care and going deep and making connection, I think about slowing down and slowing the pace and being thoughtful about that constant go, 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 move, 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 do as much as you can. And the second that I feel my kids are talking too much or I'm losing them, I need to like re-engage and push to the next thing. And so how that works against this.
Yeah.
So we were talking about that.
And just finding time within even a busy professional development calendar to actually sit with staff and have a thought experiment like this. Just finding that time can be a challenge too. It definitely takes a reprioritization school-wide. Any other questions or thoughts coming up about this topic in general, about the adult side of social emotional learning in school? Yeah.
I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but I do think that our time with other adults is really hard to come by, and it's not usually quality. It's usually the administrators kind of barking at us, but we like to do this, and they're adding to our to-do list. Not no offense to but just I think that teachers feel, for the most part, like they are an island in a room trying to get so much done and can't manage it all, and are taking a lot home, and it's a really intense conflict pace. And this work sort of makes you feel like, oh, maybe one day we can be better at sharing the load and not feeling like we are these islands. Because I think that the students are definitely picking up on the fact that these adults are running around like chickens and no one's really helping each other. And so why should they start helping each other? Yeah.
That's a good point. And the section on adult social emotional learning is divided into 3 different pieces. One is just about learning about SEL and about ourselves. The second is focused on that sense of community and collaboration among adults and what a school leader and a school SEL team can do to sort of start to build in some of those practices into time that does exist throughout the day, and setting aside some time during those meetings that already exist and are already on the calendar, and devoting it. to that community building aspect, and also just being able to share questions and have your colleagues be consultants for you on different matters that are coming up.
Responding as a building leader, it is extremely critical that the commitment is made, that we do provide that time, but that we're also providing that basic need of appreciation, of respect, of acknowledgement of the things that are being done, and to call us on the carpet when we're not doing it. Because our job is nothing compared to the main actors, the main cast, which are you guys. And so, if we're going to do this, then it has to start from me too. And I have to be willing to do that. And I have to be willing to accept the fact that I got to change my practice. And if I'm willing to do that, then you have a much better chance of a building commitment. Because if we don't take care of you, forget everything else. That's not a preach.
No, thank you.
But that's coming from my heart. Because that's the way I believe things should happen. And I fall short. But I also know that there are many things that I can do. My head's swimming right now with how this can be done. And if I didn't have my team here, I am smiling in my heart because they're here with me tonight. And they're willing to say, this is something we can do. So thank you for saying that.
On that note, I won't ask anyone to follow that. So focus area 3 is often one that people jump to first, and often people think is a quick thing that we can just choose the set of lessons that we want to use to teach social emotional learning, and we're all set. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. This is by far the biggest section within the school guide. So this brings in the idea of student voice practices, your multi-tiered systems of support, your discipline policies, your approach to school climate. It does, of course, include adopting an evidence-based program. CASEL is a big proponent of that. But also, at the same time, we're teaching social emotional skills directly in classrooms who are also focused on the environment we create in our classroom, the way we're integrating it into what we're teaching and how we're teaching. And also, it brings in this idea of working with those other adults who interact with our students as partners and bringing them in as true value partners and deciding how we're going to pursue our SEL goals together. So a quick note on those evidence-based programs. Sometimes and often, and in fact you've heard the principal of Marcus Garvey say this as well, they actually started with adopting an evidence-based curriculum. That doesn't mean you did it wrong. It just means that often an evidence-based program is a good way to build that common language as a staff, understand really what SEL is from the beginning, and then go back and fill in some of those other pieces that are part of that 4-part process of SEL development as a school. And sometimes an evidence-based program is especially useful because it can be that thing that stays consistent. If there's turnover, teachers are moving on to other buildings and leaders are moving on to other buildings as well. Often the curriculum is the thing that is still there and can be passed on and sort of keep that flame lit as some new leadership may keep coming into the school and learning about what the school's already been doing. A good place to go to learn more about evidence-based programs is those CASEL program guides. It's something that'll come up right away if you just Google CASEL program guide. And that's a free resource as well that is going to be updated in the next year, so that's exciting as well. But what I'd like to spend some time focusing on, the tool that I picked is focused on the classroom level of social emotional learning. You might have seen a graphic like this before. We call this the 3-legged stool of classroom SEL. So one of the legs is explicit SEL instruction. Another is a supportive classroom environment, and the third is integration of SEL instruction. So those are all key pieces of what a really well integrated classroom would look like when a teacher is really trying to use SEL in every way and not just a single way. And kind of to the point that I heard coming up just a moment ago, that teachers are really busy and they're running from thing to thing and they have so many different objectives that they're meeting throughout the day. I want to emphasize, and I'm a former teacher as well, that asking teachers to take on social emotional learning when, in addition to what they're already doing, isn't nothing. But it should ideally line up well with what they already want to be doing and what they're already being asked to do to be engaging and to boost academic achievement. So to get an idea of how these things overlap with what teachers are already being asked to do, what teachers are already doing in their classrooms now and they're already focused on, what I reproduced in the packet for you is the teacher's SEL in the classroom self-assessment. So that's 2 pages. It goes on to, I think I lost my page numbers here again. There's the next 2 pages in there. And I'd like to give you the chance to just sort of look this over with people you're sitting here and think specifically about this question. How does what you're reading here align with what teachers are already focused on? And what maybe stands out to you as something they may not be focused on right now? We're going to close our evening with focus area 4, which is about reflecting on data for continuous improvement. And I want to share with you the graphic that I like to use when talking about data with my colleagues who don't really like to talk about data, just many people I find. So I like to just explain it this way. Focus area 4, when we want to look at data, this is something that happens throughout the entire process. It's not step 4. It's not the last step, right, that we don't do until the end here. When you're in that organized stage, your big question is, where do we want to go? Where are we right now, and where are we already been? That's a data question. And I might have to think about, if I know where I want to go, what kind of numbers am I going to want to look at to know if I'm getting closer to where I want to go? When I'm in this green stage, focus area 2 and focus area 3, I'm asking these questions frequently. How are we going to get from where we are right now? And we may need to look at some numbers to get an idea of where we are right now. How are we going to get from where we are right now to where we want to be? And we're constantly making decisions throughout the year and course corrections if we realize that we're not heading in that direction that we set for ourselves when we decided what our school-wide vision was, when we decided what our school-wide SEL goals were going to be. So we're constantly having these rapid learning cycles where at our SEL team meetings, we're sitting down with some data, maybe our school climate data, maybe our attendance data, maybe the turnout that we had at family events to learn about are we moving in the direction we wanted to go with our vision for SEL. And then at the end of the year, often when we're reflecting and planning for the following year, our big question is, are we moving in the right direction? And what did we learn this year that we want to apply as we move forward? So I think in a simple way, that's really what we're talking about when we talk about focus area 4. So the big questions here are, what data are we actually going to look at to know if we're making progress? If you're interested in specific SEL assessments of social emotional skills, they exist. And you can look at the assessment guide to learn more about that. But often schools use data that they already have at their fingertips, or someone has at their fingertips. So sometimes something that central office can support schools with. Also, are we actually learning as we go from SEL implementation, and are we going to apply that? So some of the resources that you can find in focus area 4, there's a walkthrough protocol that you can use to look for the evidence of those 10 indicators of school-wide SEL. There's also a staff bank and community partner survey, which is actually undergoing some revisions right now, so it's going to be newly improved in probably just a couple weeks. And the one that I wanted to show you, and I have in your packet for you, is the SEL data reflection protocol. It probably looks pretty similar to some protocols you've looked at before, but it's very specially designed to look at SEL data. And it's also really written intentionally to move people who are having those data discussions to apply an equity lens when they're looking at data. If you actually just flip over to the very back of your packet, you'll see a little bit of what I mean. There's some suggested questions here. We're looking at different types of data that school climate teams or SEL teams often look at. And some of these suggested questions are just to give you a starting point to think about how can we look at this data in a way that we're having an equity mindset. We're really thinking about how is the school experience different for different students and different adults in our building. The SEL data reflection protocol is reproduced in full. It starts on page 13. I'm sorry, it starts before that. It starts on page 12 in your packet. And basically the steps are as follows. There's step 0, or a data reflection meeting, where you're preparing with the data that you want to look at. You might be thinking about specific questions you want to ask to prompt that reflection on equity, and you're also thinking about how we're going to make sure we hear from everybody in the room and not just the voices that are most prominent. And then the facilitator, once the meeting is beginning, first just asks everyone to describe the data without passing judgments about what it might mean. Then a step that we don't often see in data reflection protocols is to actually take a moment to think about missions, because numbers on a page don't tell the whole story, right? There's a lot beneath that doesn't show up when we're looking at numbers, we're looking at a chart. So what are we not seeing right now that we might want to learn more about before we interpret this and before we act on it? Who do we want to ask more information to learn more? The third step, again, is a really typical one in any sort of data reflection protocol. What does this data suggest, the data that we have? And how does this, what does this implications does it have for our school-wide SEL plan and what we're doing so far? Are we moving in the right direction? How do we know? And then, of course, articulating some next steps. So if you take a look at page 13, that's a facilitator's guide. And if you turn the page to page 15, you'll see a participant handout. I think it'll probably be most helpful if you're open to the participant handout. And I wanted to give you a chance to sort of get your feet wet with this. And since we don't have, you probably didn't bring a bunch of data with you to look at. I supplied some. It got cut off a little bit. But if you turn back a couple pages, you'll see pages that look like this. This is school climate data. This is something that the whole district is using. It's not something special they did just for their social emotional learning plan. But there's some data on teacher to student trust, or sorry, student towards teacher trust, and how it's changed over time from 2012 to 2015. It's a little bit outdated. And then students' responses to 4 different specific questions about how they trust their teachers. And then the next page is teacher to teacher trust, where there are 4 slightly different questions that teachers answered about the relationships with their colleagues and how that's changed over time from 2012 to 2015. So although it's a little bit cut off, you are missing, for example, the strongly agreed column. I think it gives you enough that you can get some ideas from what this data might say. So I want to give you some time to actually run through this data protocol with your table. So again, take some time to look at the data, but then once you've had a chance to take a look, you can either choose a facilitator at your table if you choose, or you can all just open right up to page 15 and just walk through those 5 different steps with the data that you're looking at. See how it feels and imagine what it would feel like to use this at your own school setting. Okay. Just like getting started information here is how it works. But for all of you, I just want to appreciate that everyone in this room has had a very different experience and everyone is in a very different place on their timeline. So one place to start if you're going to the school guide for the first time is the button at the very bottom of the main page that says where to start. It'll give you a couple different options of just beginning, we're already implementing, and teacher, counselor, school staff member, I'm curious about this. And then this bottom one is I'm looking for information on a specific topic. That will give you a whole bunch of quick links to specific topics that are often asked about. So that's one thing that you may want to take a closer look at if you go back to that main page. All of the resources that I shared with you tonight can be found in this section that you mouse over, and then those 4 different focus areas appear, focus area 1 through 4. That's how you can navigate to all those different resources pretty quickly. So, for example, if you decided tonight your next focus is going to be about strengthening adult SEL, You can go to that page. There's top navigation here, so you can go to the section that's all about learning more about what SEL is and what it means for us. The section on Collaborate, which is about building adult community and really creating a positive work setting for the adults in the building. And then the model section, which has a few exercises to specifically think about how are we modeling SEL and the way we interact with students, but also leadership to their staff. How are they modeling SEL all the time as well? How are we modeling SEL with each other, and how are we sort of building our shared agreements about how we want to act with each other? So that's the way to navigate to most of the resources, although you can also just shortcut to resources, and then it kind of opens up like an accordion for different types of resources that you can be looking for. So that's another quick way to get to specific tools. The last thing I want to show you though on the website is the track progress button at the top. So this is a good place to go if you want to start by sort of using that rubric and that planner tool to figure out where are we right now, where do we want to go next, what might be our next big area of focus. That's also the place where there's a walkthrough protocol if you wanted to experiment with doing walking around your school, just seeing what are we already doing really well, where's the evidence that we're already implementing social emotional learning here, and then the staff, family, and community partner survey, which is something that you can share with your different stakeholders to get more about their views about how they see SEL or how they may not be seeing SEL yet across the building. And that doesn't require a deep knowledge of what social emotional learning is. It's something that's pretty user-friendly for different audiences. So all different sorts of resources available here. I just wanted to close though with sort of my recommendations for where to start if this is something that's new to you. So definitely the page that I showed you that says where to start. Also, I think one of those foundational things is to think about who you want to recruit to be on an SEL team with you. I assume if you're in the room, you might be on that team, but who else needs to be on that team with you to really have good representative groups? Doing that rubric as sort of baseline data, and then starting that process of foundational learning and building a shared vision with the school community. So to close, I wanted to ask you to sort of reflect on the evening and what you're taking away. Tonight you've seen a lot about how social emotional learning aligns with things you're already doing to make your school a welcoming place where students are really set up to learn. And hopefully you've gathered some ideas that you want to use to continuously improve in that process. So if you just try and pick out and mentally commit to one thing that you want to share with a colleague that you've gathered so far, one thing you want to use yourself, and one thing you want to think about on the way home. So if you could just take a moment, and I think we're going to have Mr. Hamilton close us out finally, but you could take a moment to think through this for yourself, and also just thank the people who you sat with for contributing to your experience tonight, and share one of these thoughts with them. That's how I'd like us to close.